police are investigating multiple allegations against Angela Rayner, possibly extending beyond electoral law offences. At least a dozen officers at Greater Manchester Police are investigating the Labour deputy leader over the sale of her former council house in Stockport and her tax affairs. The investigation is expected to take weeks rather than days.
Grilled at Prime Minister's questions today, Sir Keir Starmer continued to back his deputy a bit, following jibes from Rishi Sunak.
Mr. Speaker, all I'd say is he ought to spend a bit less time reading that book and a bit more time reading the Deputy Leader's tax advice.
We've got a billionaire Prime Minister and a billionaire Prime Minister, both of whose families have used schemes to avoid millions of pounds of tax, smearing a working-class woman.
Smearing a working-class woman? What a terrible thing to do! Angela Rayner has denied any wrongdoing, insisting she followed the rules at all times. Joining us now is former Government Advisor James Price, and Isabel Oakeshott is still with us. Let's go to you first, James. When did the newspapers forget that her tax affairs were always being investigated? That was the main thrust of the story when it broke about a month ago, which was she was being investigated for potential evasion of capital gains tax for allegedly lying about where she was living. And also, of course, if you lied about where you were living, you are potentially breaking electoral law as well. That was almost an addendum. Why have the papers forgotten the tax affairs? They go, also, now she's being investigated for her tax affairs. She always was.
Well, the problem here you've got is that the tax affairs are, by their nature, very complicated, and therefore complicated gets quite boring. That's why sex scandals sell newspapers so much better, because it's easy and everybody kind of can get their head around it. But the thing that's really interested me is that when it's Rishi Sunak or my old boss or any of these other kind of problems come along, oh, it must be very terrible, the Tories are all very evil because the numbers of money is higher and all this kind of stuff. But as you just saw there, Keir Starmer's defence is, well, she's a working class woman, you can't smear her. So we've managed to get this kind of bizarre identity politics even into the areas of criminality, as if someone being from one class or another, or being one sex or another or something else, is enough of a reason that she shouldn't face scrutiny. Right, this kind of soft bigotry of low expectations, as it used to be called, holds everybody back. It does all of us a mad disservice. And the saddest thing for me is that when it's my old boss because he was successful and managed to, lead the world's best vaccine rollout and all these sorts of things, he was an easy target. But when it's Angela Rayner, whose main contribution seems to be shouting the word scum at her opponents across the House of Commons, she needs to be given a break and held to a lower standard. I don't understand it at all.
I wonder how useful this is to the Conservative Party, though. I mean, when you see things suddenly reappear in newspapers, you often wonder if a press office has had their hand in that. And quite convenient, it gave Rishi Sunak another opportunity to bring it up at PMQs and potentially try and deflect away from more embarrassing things he may be questioned on. But, the Labour response is very predictable. And I kind of feel it's one of those issues that, depending who you vote for, who you're minded to vote for, you're either going to support the Labour response and say, well, it's all very well the Conservatives saying this about Rayner, but look at some of their tax avoidance. Or you're going to support the Conservatives and say, well, I remember the time when Angela Rayner was champing up the bit to do down Boris Johnson for eating a piece of cake. I'm not sure, actually, it edifies either side.
No, absolutely not. No, there are no winners from any of this. That we used to be, since the Profumo scandal of the 1960s, we realised that politicians were human as well, and they were flawed, and that it was such a scandal that we couldn't not report on it. Everybody now is aware that politicians, just like everybody else, probably more than everybody else, have their own failings. The blue team has failings, the red team has failings. Goodness knows, the yellow team up north of the border have their failings as well. And everybody sort of says, as you say rightly, Alex, a pox on all their houses. I think that's a real problem. I think we've either got to have a scenario where everybody must continue to be whiter than white, must be beyond reproach, and the paragons of justice, which we know is impossible, or we go, okay, look, everyone's going to mess up on these things. Give a scenario, a world in which they can say, yes, I messed up. Let me go and have a look at this. I didn't understand the taxes right. Let me go and try and fix it. And have a second chance, have that kind of Christian idea of grace or forgiveness, and then see what else they can actually contribute to public life. Because we're losing far too many people in some scandals and things that I think that shouldn't be career ending. Some, of course, should. but we lose really high quality people. And of course, when you see all this kind of scrutiny of people, one way or another, if you've got really talented people out there who've been successful, who may not have a perfect blame-free record, they are stopping from getting involved in public life in the first place. Can you imagine what would have happened if Churchill had never reared his head again after Gallipoli? We wouldn't have had the greatest leader who helped us fight against the Nazis and all the rest of it. And there are numerous other examples. But this is the thing that really concerns me. Where do we have forgiveness or grace in public life today?
Well, but this comes down to, did the deputy leader of the Labour Party break the law or did she not? She says she doesn't. She didn't, and she says she has a letter from a tax expert which will exonerate her. Of course, we're all saying, well, show it to us. She goes, I'm not going to show you my personal tax returns. We're not asking for your personal tax returns. We're asking for that letter.
Although it is Labour policy for them to publish them.
Well, it isn't. Not for the deputy leader. It isn't for the deputy leader. So she doesn't have to, according to Labour policy. The point is, 12 officers, at least 12 Manchester detectives are now investigating her. And if it turns out that she lied about her capital gains and where she was living, as I say, the electoral fraud is, I think, a lesser charge. But if it turns out that she evaded taxes illegally, then she deserves everything she's going to get. She can't carry on as deputy Labour leader. She says she's going to stand down. It's as simple as that. It's nothing to do with her being working class or, Ange and all that. It is, did she break the law or did she not? And now she's got 12 Manchester coppers on her backside and she won't like it.
No, absolutely right. And again, there is this kind of hypocrisy about it. The number of people whom Angela Rayner has called on to resign for non-criminal acts, if this is a criminal investigation now happening to her, that's pretty serious going. It does, as Alex has said as well, it just brings everybody down into the mud on these kinds of things. People like to sow and they don't like to reap very much. The concern for the Conservatives, in a way, almost, is why do you want to lose this person from the front bench who is actually really unpopular, I think, on the doorstep? Every doorstep I've ever knocked on when I've been a Conservative activist, she tends to come up and not in a great way. And for many people in the sort of the BBC and the sort of well-to-do Islington media sets, go, oh, look at this gritty, authentic working class woman and all the rest of it. But people like my parents who didn't go to university, who've worked hard all their lives, they look at someone like this and says, what? And she's just worked for a trade union and got given a safe Labour seat and has done nothing really much significance before. This isn't a kind of person to represent me. And this is she's almost a weird parody of working class people. I mean, I know I sound a bit plummy now, but this is not the kind of world that I grew up in when Alex and I were growing up in Gloucester. People work really, really hard and they do their best. They don't try and fiddle the house they live in with their partner and all these kinds of things. I think that problem, and also the fact that her and Keir Starmer clearly don't get on with each other. The Conservatives pushing this, I completely understand it. But you almost want to keep her in post to help destabilise the Labour Party even more.
James, thank you very much. You've never mentioned that you two come from Gloucester before.
We never bring that up, do we, Bauer?
It's contractually obligated.
Thanks, James. Great stuff.
Cheers, James.
Thank you.